In the Ukraine and Poland, everything of use to the enemy had been destroyed in the wake of the retreating Germans, leaving behind a trail of devastation. The policy was now to be carried out in the fatherland itself. Hitler insisted that because the best of the German people would have fallen in battle, the only ones left would be those who were inferior, and their needs were irrelevant. Not a bridge, factory, railway, or food store was to be left intact. At the beginning of April, with the Soviet campaigns in Silesia and Pomerania effectively over, the Red Army embarked on its fastest redeployment of the entire war. Every available man, gun, tank and shell was rushed to the Oder-Neisse front for the offensive that would take the Red Army into the heart of Hitler's capital. The logistics were of awesome complexity. On Zhukov's front, the last German stronghold threatening the Soviet bridgehead at Kustrin had been overrun, and 40 engineer battalions had been toiling night and day to build 25 bridges over the Oder, 2 bridges for every mile and a half of front. Zhukov's bridgeheads, of which Kustrin was the biggest, were the most valuable assets the Red Army possessed. Elsewhere, the rivers Neisse and Oder would have to be crossed by boat or by bridges built under enemy fire. But at Kustrin, the door to Berlin had already been prized open. The concentration of forces for the final offensive surpassed anything yet seen in the history of warfare. 2.5 million men, nearly 45,000 guns and rocket launchers, and 6,250 tanks were packed behind a front only 250 miles long. Zhukov alone was massing 7 million tons of artillery ammunition for his initial blow. First Belo-Russian was to launch its drive on a broad front, but striking hardest from its 2 bridgeheads north and south of Frankfurt. Under the direct operational control of Marshal Zhukov, First Belo-Russian had 77 divisions in 11 armies, 6 field armies, a guards army, 2 shock armies, and 2 guards tank armies. Zhukov could also call on the 16th and 18th Air Armies for coordinated air-ground operations. Zhukov's attack would be launched on April the 16th. On Zhukov's right flank, 2nd Belo-Russian Front was to attack west and north, securing the main Berlin operation. Commanded by General Konstantin Rokossovsky, 2nd Belo-Russian had 3 field armies, a shock army, and a guards tank army. They would be supported by the 4th Air Army. Rokossovsky would attack on April the 18th. The 1st Ukrainian Front was to destroy enemy forces south of Berlin. 1st Ukrainian was commanded by Marshal Ivan Konev, Zhukov's greatest rival. Konev had 3 field armies, 2 guards armies, and 2 tank armies for his initial thrust, with 2 more field armies from 3rd Belo-Russian as reinforcements. However, these would not be in place in time for the start of operations on April the 16th. For support, Konev could call on the 2nd Air Army. On April 1st, 1945, Marshal Zhukov left his headquarters behind the Oder front and flew to Moscow for consultations with Stalin. Since November of the previous year, Zhukov had understood that Stalin had given him, and him alone, the right to take Berlin. He was about to discover that the rules had changed. Stalin had decided to let Zhukov's 1st Belarusian and Konyev's 1st Ukrainian fronts race each other for the honor of taking the German capital. After his meeting with Stalin, Zhukov and his 1st Belarusian commanders pored over a scale model of the approaches to the city. Zhukov's generals were quickly left in no doubt that anyone who endangered his chances of being first to Berlin would face the direst consequences. On the eve of the Russian onslaught, 1 million German soldiers stood between the Red Army and Berlin. Many divisions were made up of men scoured from police and training units, the Luftwaffe, Volkssturm, Hitler Youth, and Foreign SS. But they were still capable of mounting a determined defense. Flying courts-martial and summary executions were the fate of those who showed reluctance to fight. Nor did many expect mercy should the Russian offensive succeed. The greatest problem facing the defenders was a desperate shortage of tanks. Hitler still refused to believe that the main Russian objective was Berlin, and certain that the most powerful attack would be aimed at Czechoslovakia, he sent 4 veteran panzer divisions south. He had already expended the powerful 6th SS Panzer Army in a vain attempt to save the Hungarian oil fields, and only 850 tanks were now left on the Oder front. The full force of the Russian offensive against the German capital would be borne by Army Group Vistula, commanded by Colonel General Gotthard Heinrici, one of the few German experts in defensive warfare. Army Group Vistula fielded 2 armies, 3rd Panzer and 9th Army. 3rd Panzer under General Hasso von Manteuffel had in fact no true panzer formations. Of its 9 divisions, 4 were infantry, including naval and Luftwaffe divisions, and 5 were Panzer Grenadier or Volkssturm divisions, some of them resting. 3rd Panzer occupied a 95-mile front, running north of Berlin to the Baltic coast. 9th Army under General Theodor Busse had 1 Panzer, 2 Panzer Grenadier, and 9 infantry divisions. 9th Army defended an 80-mile line on the Oder from Berlin down to the junction with the Neisse. South of 9th Army, the left wing of Army Group Center would also face the Russian onslaught. Commanded by Ferdinand Schörner, now a field marshal, Army Group Center's contribution to the defense would be 4th Panzer Army. 4th Panzer fielded 1 Panzer Division, 9 infantry, and 2 Panzer Grenadier divisions. In reserve around Berlin were the 6 weak divisions of the 56th Panzer Corps, along with 3 infantry divisions of Luftwaffe and headquarters troops, and in Berlin itself, 100 battalions of Volkssturm. There was also the possibility of reinforcement from 12th Army west of Berlin, commanded